July 29th, 2015, Lake County, Northern California. I'm at the Rocky Fire, a 70,000-acre wildfire on its first day as it explodes in size out of control of firefighters. Sorry, Mom and Dad. This is my dozenth fire of the season, chasing wildfires across California in its worst drought on record. My heart's pounding as I jump into my car and zoom down the road and away from the spot fires that have almost surrounded me on the hill. Later on, as I drive to my hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm covered in ash, dried sweat, and flame retardant that's all over my car from the planes dropping it on me during the fire. In a state of part delirium, exhaustion, and adrenaline come down, I started thinking about how modern technological advances, communication, and automation have allowed us to super specialize in careers like never before. The broadcasting of images in the field on a cellular-based broadband card, the ability to find a hotel on a phone-based app, and the ability to listen to wildfire and emergency radio traffic on my cell phone are some examples just from the Rocky Fire. Specifically, it's no longer good enough just to be a photographer, or just a photographer that takes pictures of the climate, environment, or fires. You've got to be the photographer that takes pictures of fires at night with long exposures for a project. And specifically, going back to wider cell coverage across the US, there's also the automation of industrial processes that have allowed for a concept that I call super specialization. These tech advances have allowed me to carve a career niche that's sustainable in the 21st century. The bigger picture here is that as tech improves, there's less of a need for jobs as we traditionally define them. Now, outside of photography, how do you specialize in other creative fields? Or in starting a business that sells a product? This is a brewery in Wyoming that literally has 15 different kinds of beer. Now, there's a mayonnaise shop in Brooklyn called Empire Mayonnaise, and I'm like, okay, how can this survive? Just a mayonnaise shop? How's their demand? What shifts in society today allow the shop to be solvent? What's the backstory that allows me to be a fire photographer, or in this case, a mayonnaise connoisseur? Another small business example using emerging tech and some recent communication improvements is a company called DJI. Now, DJI is a company that makes aerial drones and fantastic stabilized cameras to use on their drones. Their latest and greatest model is the X5 camera. Well, to use the X5 camera on DJI's brand new handheld flightless gimbal, you need a special adapter. Well, DJI is 3 to 6 months out from making this adapter. So I hop on Twitter and start complaining to DJI. When are you guys going to come out with this adapter? Well, we're going to have in 3 to 6 months. Well, some guy in Canada tweets at me that, hey, I have a 3D printer in my garage and I'm already manufacturing this adapter. I'm like, this is cool. So this guy's been making it on his 3D printer and he's 3 months ahead of the company that's supposed to be making the adapter. This wasn't even possible 3 to 5 years ago. Twitter was around, but the ability to communicate with this idea on his 3D printer, to be able to come up with this blueprint in AutoCAD and to be able to put it through on his printer in his garage wasn't there. You had to go to like a shop and get molds made and do a production run and need $100,000 just to do that. He was able to do it with a $1,500 machine. That's specialization in 21st century craftsmanship at its finest. Now, these types of improvements in efficiency have been a theme in America throughout the 20th century. So a little bit of historic background. In 2016, if we had the same amount of people working on farms as we did in 1900, we'd have over 100 million Americans still working in fields. So we've made some pretty serious advancements in our agricultural technology that have freed up a lot of population to go and specialize and to go into other careers. Now, and today there's only about 6 million people working in agriculture, and there's still a lot of improvements that are happening. Now, speaking of agriculture, let's talk about tomatoes, and hopefully not the ones you guys are going to be throwing at me. So a few months ago, I was running around a field in Central Valley near the tiny town of Coalinga off of Interstate 5, and I was photographing this tomato field for the Wall Street Journal. Now, the story was focusing on this automated tomato harvesting machine. 3 people run the machine and does the work of 12 to 15 laborers. So it's pretty amazing that this one machine can do this, and it's freeing up people from doing back-breaking labor. Another example is a robotic strawberry picker that's in development up in Camarillo by some of the largest strawberry companies, or strawberry growers rather, in California. It uses computer-controlled arms and software algorithms to pick the ripest strawberries. It'll reduce the need for manual labor in picking strawberries. Now, did you know that the largest strawberry producers in California actually have a huge labor shortage? Because it's literally back-breaking labor even at $10 to $15 an hour. So as you can see, we're not just having the motorized tractor replace the mule anymore. We're having consistent incremental advancements in the agriculture world. Now, another sector that's seeing this automation and change is the transportation industry. It's a $1.33 billion per year business, at least according to the US Department of Commerce a couple years ago. So there's a widely acclaimed Oxford Martin University study that talks about computerization is no longer confined to routine manufacturing tasks. You have things like self-driving Google cars, and there's a theory that soon all our freight is going to be driven by automated vehicles in the next few years. Moving into the digital realm, there's one more factor making this possible. According to Cisco, a Cisco white paper, average smartphone use has increased by about 40% in 2015 over 2014. So people are using a little bit over 900 megabytes of data a month on their phone versus about 650 in 2014. That's a pretty big year-over-year change. The skyrocketing use of mobile internet and data networks has allowed user engagement on apps like Instagram to skyrocket. What this does, at least in my field, is allow for better instant visual communication. This is an explosion of Instagram usage across the globe, and it actually has been interesting in how it's applied to places like the Middle East during the Arab Spring. Studies have shown that a causation, but not necessarily a correlation between mobile broadband usage and increased communication on platforms like Twitter during the Tahrir Square uprising and other Arab Spring revolutions. Now, what that's doing is providing faster communication and the spread of ideas, ideas that may necessarily have been able to, couldn't be spread under repressive regimes. Another figure is that global mobile data traffic will increase nearly 800% between 2015 and 2020, according to the Cisco white paper. Now, the big picture here is that these advances in both digital and industrial technology are redefining the way we work in the 21st century. There are simply less people needed to make the world go round, and the world goes around faster. A thought-provoking article in The Atlantic by Derek Thompson postulates that this very theory of worklessness, that not all of us are going to need jobs in the future, addresses that we might be returning to an era of craftsmanship and specialization, much like before the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, cheap goods and mass production put many of these specialists out of business, and now we're seeing a return to it. I mean, you had your weaver, your silversmith, all put out by industrial processes that were able to manufacture those products quickly and more cheaply. Now, it's funny, after I thought of this Canadian guy beating DJI to their own adapter, he interviewed an economist at Harvard that said the same thing, that 3D printing is going to revolutionize the way we manufacture in the US. So you can kind of see how the world's now in our pocket or in our garage, or in this case, a guy on Twitter in Canada, and how someone walking around in the middle of a burning forest in the middle of the night can make a career out of it. Now, we need to look at some downsides. So this is a picture off of Interstate Highway 30 in rural Ohio. So specialization and the rising craftsmanship creates a lot of products in a certain category. And I'm going to go back to this slide here real quick, to something that I call the Amazon paradox. So you go to buy something like ketchup, for example, and there's like 20 different kinds of ketchup. Same ketchup, different sizes. It's overwhelming. Barry Schwartz, in his 2004 TED Talk called The Paradox of Choice, speaks really eloquently on this issue. I highly recommend you look at the talk. Now, going back to this image from Ohio, there's a downside to this automation. Look at the Rust Belt in America. You go look at Detroit or Columbus. These cities have been decimated. You have huge vacancy rates in industrial areas, high poverty, high crime. So this is an issue that we need to deal with. City residents are kind of responding to this, farming in open fields, kind of trying to rebuild and reinvest in these communities, but that's really not a long-term solution. So I don't have the answer to that tonight, so it's incumbent on all of us as consumers to come up with, or at least contribute to a solution. Part of that is to support local craftsmanship and manufacturing where it's possible. And what about developing countries where tech gains or capital to fund automation isn't there? It's just not the same. 2 weeks ago, I was in Ecuador driving down the Pan-American Highway with my friend Angel, kind of talking about how he grew up. He grew up in a small town in southern Ecuador, one of 8 siblings growing up on a farm. And the food that they grew, they used to live off of or to trade for kind of the goods and necessities that they needed. Well, they didn't have the capital to invest in the multi-million-dollar machines to automate agriculture and to increase yield. The economy of scale there doesn't exist. And even if the labor was more expensive like it is in the US, there's just too many people that need jobs there that don't have the ability to specialize. So another part of this idea is that a super specialized person or an automated society gives back to the community locally or abroad and helps other people along the way through mentorship, awareness, or maybe in Ecuador's case, some investment. So become an expert in your field and be an advocate. Pay it forward and help others reach success that may not have had that opportunity or privilege. So if this all sounds crazy, this is not new, and similar changes have happened throughout world history, and some lessons we can learn. This is a cathedral in Amsterdam that's like 300 or 400 years old. So around 1440, Johannes Gutenberg perfected the printing press, and it slowly improved as ideas could more broadly be shared as he refined his processes. So he could go from printing a few dozen books a day to a few hundred books a day. So the book and written word, instead of having to be written painstakingly by monks and monasteries, could be, more quickly disseminated. So literacy goes up. Books instead of luxury items were now something the middle class can enjoy and merchants could afford them. So ideas were spread, heresy ensued, and social change swept Europe over the following centuries. 300 years after the printing press was invented, we see the Enlightenment period in Europe, whereas there's a profusion of liberal and progressive ideas in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We have the birth of democracies, republics, many of the underpinnings of modern society. I feel like I'm kind of glossing over history and doing a quick survey, but the idea here is that the way we advance and the way we communicate ideas and how those ideas are shared allow for these world-altering changes to occur, and this continues to happen today. Now, how is this relevant to what I do as a photographer? Let's go back to the big picture here. Everyone's on their phone. At a fire, we're sharing pictures on Instagram, tweeting from the side of a mountain, getting this information to market faster than traditional news media or even fire public information officers, which are the firefighters who kind of spread information to the news agencies. So, it's just crazy how quickly we're able to work with just a little broadband card in our backpacks. So I want a show of hands here. Who has an iPhone or a smartphone? Who has Instagram? That's a huge amount. Did you know that 20% of all people between ages 16 and 64 of all the internet have Instagram? 20% of everybody has internet in the world. That's a pretty crazy number. And then people between the ages of 16 and 24, it's 40% of you. That is a really huge amount of market penetration for one app. Now, how do you make money as a photographer? Instagram is not sending me checks. It would be cool, but they're not. So bills have to be paid and taxes have to be taxed. So you need to find the intersection of what you love doing and then somebody willing to pay for that talent, product, or service. Remember the guy making the adapters for DJI on his 3D printer in Canada? There you go. The guy loves 3D printing and using AutoCAD, and he's able to sell these adapters and do pretty well. Now, there's an author named Chris Guillebeau who has published numerous books on just this subject about finding where your passion combines with a demand. And there's dozens of examples of entrepreneurs all across the United States doing that very same thing. So if you build something, people will come. Photographing fire isn't profitable, but now companies seek me out to work on projects with their products that are related to fire and public safety. By building a creative niche, you make yourself the best option to do business with. They're not going to hire a ski or wedding photographer to photograph a fire hose. It's a whole other industry-specific conversation. So create good work, market it, and find an audience willing to pay for it. Take advantage of emerging technologies to do what you do better than anybody else. And don't be afraid to break the traditional mode of what is defined as work, because history shows us that it changes. Further, the world is ripe for specialization, and the technology exists to do it. And the communication on apps like Instagram is only increasing. So again, back to the big picture. We're entering a new, profound era where the small business and individual craftsman has the freedom to pursue projects due to the reduction in need of labor. Remember the obligation to lift others up as well. So I give you the self-employed, super-specialized creative social contract. As a self-employed creative person, artist, craftsman, etc., whether it's a photographer, artist, designer, writer, you're creating something. That's valuable. Nobody's telling you what to do, and you take a huge risk doing it. You should be compensated for that risk. However, your end of the bargain is that you must be productive and creative. And beyond the creating, be willing to be your own accountant, marketer, collections agency, tech support, and usually therapist. And the other obligation that you have is to continue to work diligently and put in the hours to create something new and exciting and to share it with the rest of the world.